Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through our perpetually lefty, pink okami, soy boy cuck, Antifa super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. In 2024, I'm switching it up and taking it back to the basics. I'm a socialist trying to grapple with our world by reflecting on it through art, theory, and the will of the people. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days? It's been a few weeks since we talked about these things, so I imagine there's some stuff that's accumulated.
There is a little bit. First off, I know we both love a nun movie, and I saw Immaculate. Did you see Immaculate?
Oh yeah, no, I have not.
All right.
But I've heard about it.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know much about it other than the title. Like, I feel like the title is fairly obvious about a little bit about what is going on with it. It's really fun. I liked it a lot, and I really like when a crazy movie commits to that premise and sees it through, and it's got a fucking killer ending. Like, I really enjoyed the ending of this. But yeah, it's gross, it's grody, it's fun. I think you would like it because I know we like nun movies and we like horror movies.
Have you seen The First Omen?
The First Omen. Is that the one that just came out?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I have not.
Okay, the reason why I ask is it is my understanding that these movies are basically the same.
Oh, really?
Yes, that their plot is like...
I just slammed my coffee mug down really loud next to the mic.
Speaking of a plot, dramatic. Slam down of the coffee cup. But I've heard that they're like nearly identical in terms of plot line.
I don't love most of the Omen movies. Even the original is not like one of my favorites. So I just steered clear, but now I might want to see it.
Yeah, you should have a showdown and see which one's better.
Yeah. Also, Immaculate made me not woke anymore because Sydney Sweeney's in it, and I was entranced by her beauty in the Western world.
Gazing into her tits.
Yeah, you've followed this right-wing nonsense online. For the uninitiated, right-wingers seem to think that the anecdote to wokeness is that they're all mutually gooning over Sydney Sweeney, which means we've turned a corner because now it's okay to think ladies are attractive again. Does that about sum up, I think, the position that right-wingers have on this?
I think it's the closest to capturing any semblance of meaning, because it is truly... like they've gooned themselves into a corner that makes no sense.
Right, yeah. And also, like, I think it's very funny that the realization that, like, it's okay to think that women are beautiful is just like a blonde bombshell that looks like Sydney Sweeney's very pretty, but like, yeah, you're not breaking new grounds here by saying like a white blonde woman is a like sex symbol and they think they've rediscovered
totally innovative.
Yeah, it's fucking stupid. Another thing that I've been watching is the TV series Fallout. Have you watched that? Any of it?
I've watched the pilot.
Yeah.
As we've talked about before, it kind of takes me a little while to get into a serialized show. But I am inclined to, because one, Walton Goggins.
Yeah, he's
who
great. Yeah.
we in our household we love Walton Goggins.
This one too.
And I feel bad because I can't remember the actress's name, but the lead star plays Jackie in Yellow Jackets, and I quite love Yellow Jackets, so I'm open to it. I really liked the pilot.
Yeah, it's good, and it's I think it really captures like what's fun about the video games. If you've ever played the Fallout games, is that there's an overarching plot, but a really fun part about Fallout is just getting kind of lost in the weird like apocalyptic,
the whole universe that it's laid out
of it. Yeah, and I think the show does a really good job of keeping that overarching plot that like, which is really just like a MacGuffin. She's trying to chase down like this person that like I think you see in the first episode, and I'm not quite finished it, and they haven't returned yet, that person she's going after. So it's like literally just a long journey thing where each episode is like allows her to kind of go on side quests and stuff. But it's really fun, and it really feels like the way that the video game feels. And that girl's name is Ella Purnell.
Yes.
Which I only know from this. Also, right-wingers are freaking out over her too. This might just be
because
my corner.
she's British.
honestly, and this is more crass than the Sydney Sweeney one, do you know who that guy that the quartering is?
There's like a very faint bell ringing, but
okay, he's a bigger dude with a beard that sits in front of all his like 80s 90s nostalgia toys and like gets mad at women in video games.
Yes.
Also famous,
okay.
He famously peed in his own basement because he got mad that his wife got pizza without him. Do you know about this? Which is very funny.
I do not know.
He was
about
drunk playing that game Fall Guys on stream, and then learned that his wife went and got pizza and didn't get him any. So he went and peed in a grate in his basement near where he records.
Smart. I love to weaponize urine in my own living quarters.
It's awesome. But I bring him up because he is one of the guys that like like to keep tabs on as far as but he's kind of leading the charge in these like right-wing nerd cultures that are mad because her ass apparently isn't fat enough in the Fallout games.
Of course.
Which is like, there's been a lot of on Twitter, like them sharing like the saddest side-by-side comparisons, like fixed it, of like ass shots that they've enhanced on their own, which is just, man, those kind of guys are just, they keep the blood pumping in my veins.
There's a very minor level at which I'm like, I guess the most positive thing I can say is that at least they're not channeling that energy towards, I don't know, like doxing activists, right, or they clearly possess the reactionary seeds, and that it is blooming to be terribly photoshopped videos or pictures of women's asses from a video game, as opposed to like murdering abortion providers or something. Brava.
And I think like the Gamergate doofuses have like gotten so up their own asses that they don't realize they're just self-parody now, and which I think that there's a little bit of beauty in that, because I think it's great that a lot of what idiots like the quartering are saying isn't hitting the mainstream where it would have 5 or 6 years ago, because I think so many people just are now more I guess they're a little bit more literate when it comes to encountering these idiots online than they were 5 or 6 years ago. So now I feel like the conversation has much more been, look at these morons, than people taking them more seriously and engaging like they did in Gamergate era or whatever.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is like exposure, kind of like you're talking about, just desensitization, knowing that you don't need to center them.
Yeah.
But also I wonder how much like Brianna Wu has totally gone off the fucking deep end.
Who's that?
A woman that was like pretty central to these conversations.
Okay.
She's like a game developer.
She's not one of the ones that they like attacked.
Yes, she is.
Okay.
And she is become much more reactionary and is very involved in virtual battles around like Palestine and Israel right now. And so I wonder if there's also some level at which these arguments about representation, we now collectively, there is some more cultural understanding that conversations around representation actually don't map onto like bigger political arguments cleanly. Like my point being is that representation, fighting over representation, is not actually connected, is in a robust way to like how power operates or something. But it's just like the conversation is like what helps people enter, open the door and enter in these dialogues, but it's actually not like the most meaningful thing to be fucking fighting over. So just like these dudes, like, sure, y'all want to be pissed about women's asses, like that actually has no bearing whatsoever on like anything. Deprivation, resource distribution, people honestly, suffering, like it's just not important, like,
they found a little hamster wheel that they can just spin around on and let all the other people deal with real stuff.
The goon wheel.
The goon wheel. And then the other thing I saw was a bit of a disappointment. Though I was still like into it a little bit, but I saw Late Night with the Devil. Did you see it?
Yes, I did, and I can't remember if I talked about it because I did not like it.
You did not? Okay.
Yes.
I don't think we talked about it.
Okay. So why was it a disappointment to you?
It just felt kind of vapid, I think. Like it was like a cool setup, cool premise. I really like the performance from David Desmalchian. Did I say that right?
I have no idea how you say it, but I agree. Everything you're saying, I fully agree with.
It was just like all the parts added up to kind of just a bland, like,
nothing, Lebowski. It's nothing. Like, it just felt like
just a bland possession movie that, like, oh man, you could have done so much with that premise and the setting of the 70s and like the origins of the Satanic Panic and like.
How are you gonna talk about Bohemian Grove and be boring?
Right.
Like that was the thing that I was like, I was so here for this. Like, give me the weird paranoid schizo parapolitical insanity funneled through a possession movie, and it just felt like a huge ass nothing burger.
Yeah, it was just a letdown. Like, there was like individual moments that were like kind of creepy or cool or whatever, but it just didn't add up to anything. I don't know. I agree. Maybe that was just my own me building it up in my head because I loved the premise and like everything, and then just to be like, okay.
It also doesn't help. I think it's for me personally a great / horrible example of how being too plugged into like media discourses and dialogues about something can taint my perception of it, because all I heard, like podcasts, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, I'm getting ads. It's constantly slammed by reviews being like, this movie's great, it's so good. And then when I saw it in theaters, I was really disappointed and felt like this should be on Shudder, and it was immediately on Shudder. And had I watched it on Shudder and not in a theater with all of that grandstanding in front of it, I think I would have liked it more. But I just had higher expectations because of the like the bells and whistles and trumpeting that heralded it.
Not enough AI either. Just reignite that conversation.
I do think the performance by David Dalmatian, I think it's like a little bit more like Dalmatian, like it's Dalmatian, I think maybe is how you pronounce it. I thought he was lovely, and how charming he is really carried the movie for me. Like, the parts of the movie that I enjoyed were basically because he was slam dunking it. But
I get him confused with the guy, I might have even talked about this before, but the guy that sees the trash monster and dies in Mulholland Drive.
Oh, yeah, they do.
But they look a lot alike, and they inhabit similar roles of like creepy looking weirdos in movies.
Yeah, it's like if Crispin Glover was slightly less psychotic as like a more human.
Yeah.
Like,
if he had the swoopy like Peter Parker Spider-Man 3 haircut, Crispin Glover would be those guys. But yeah, I like that David you said it.
I think it's Dalmatian.
Yeah, I like that guy. But
so.
Anyways, what have you been watching? What have you been up to?
Well, after we watched the Frankenheimer 1962 Manchurian Candidate that we covered on our last episode, I was like, I really want to watch Jonathan Demme's, Denzel version of this. It came out in 2004. And I love Jonathan Demme. He has such a wide-ranging oomph that I just was like, I don't know, I'm really curious. I felt like the performances in the movie were very strong. Like, obviously, you've got fucking Denzel. You've got Liev Schreiber playing Sergeant Shaw.
Yep.
And then you have Denzel is playing the Major, the Sinatra character. And then Meryl Streep is playing the authoritarian mommy. Slays it. Like, I thought the performances were great. Of course, the direction was great. I thought that was one of the better parts about the movie. It's very interesting to have two very strong directorial voices that are not the same, covering the same material. Like, because that was one of the things I so enjoyed about the previous iteration. But the movie feels a little bit more like they're doing a Gulf War version of Jacob's Ladder. It's like it has a little bit more of a horror flavor. It's not a horror movie, to be very clear.
More psychological.
The paranoia of it feels much more like it's in a horror tone than certainly the 60s iteration.
Yeah. More of a psychological thriller than a political thriller. That was the 60s one, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So I enjoyed it. And it was interesting to reflect on the similarities and differences. But I walk away from it being like the performances are the real standout. Yeah. Then also a couple of days ago, I rented from Cap City Video Lounge the Criterion Collection DVD of Sam Fuller's 1963 Shock Corridor. Have you ever seen this?
Nor heard, but it sounds cool.
Yes, it was really dope, and it ended up being a very interesting movie to watch right before talking about this film. So Shock Corridor is about a newspaper journalist who tricks his way inside of an asylum, like a mental asylum, to try and solve a murder. So his goal is like he wants to win a Pulitzer, and he's going to win a Pulitzer by solving a murder that happened inside of this insane asylum. And he gets his girlfriend, who is a burlesque singer and stripper, to pretend to be his sister and accuse him of sexually harassing her to get him committed.
Yeah.
The movie has all of these like kind of hallucinatory elements. Like he proceeds to have visions of her dancing while he's locked up.
Interesting. Is he supposed to be? Is it like playing on whether or not he actually is?
He's definitely losing his mind. Like he for sure is losing his mind while he is confined. And the movie has a 3-act structure where it follows 3 witnesses that he wants to interview each of these witnesses to try and get to the bottom of the murder. And each of those people are experiencing a psychosis that reflects some failure of American social and political culture. So, for example, there's a young black man who is imprisoned in the asylum who has adopted the persona of a KKK member.
Okay.
Because he was the young black man was like on the forefront of integration at a Southern white university and is gone mad from the experience and like internalized, and what he spits back out is this embodiment of white supremacy. And internalizing it so aggressively that it becomes his identity. There is a character, as it relates to this, who is experiencing psychosis related to like Red Scare fears.
Okay.
And it is just really riveting and unflinching, like does not pull back from some really intense analysis of, what was harming the psyches of Americans in the 60s.
That's cool.
Really, really fucking good.
That sounds like, have you ever read 10 Days in a Madhouse?
I have not.
It's written in the late 1800s by, her name was Nellie Bly, who was an investigative journalist who had herself committed to a women's psychiatric facility. It's obviously it's not supernatural or anything. She was doing a journalistic thing, but it seems like he got the movie may take a lot of influence from that. But it's really interesting. It's a woman who had herself committed by basically in the parlance of the time, pretending to be a floozy essentially, right, until she got committed, and then writing about the ways that she and other people were treated inside the psychiatric facility, which is obviously a different era. It was the late 1800s, so it was way more fucked up than probably even in the 1960s. But it is really interesting. It just made me think of that.
Yeah, there's what it made me think of, and it definitely connects to that, is Erving Goffman, who is a sociologist from the mid-20th century, wrote a book called Asylums about what he referred to as a mental hospital as a total institution, like an institution. I think I've used this phrase before to talk about prisons, where it's just the institution totally dominates every part of your life. You are assimilated into the institution in a complete way. But he also, in that and in his other work, talks a lot about how the labeling theory, calling people crazy and treating them as such, produces insanity. And Sam Fuller is definitely harnessing that idea and talking about psychological dysfunction in a sociological way, but without ever saying that explicitly. It's a really, really powerful movie. It's black and white, and it's worthwhile.
Cool.
And then the last thing I wanted to very briefly talk about is, I know I've mentioned before on the pod that it's pretty hard for me to listen to new music. It usually just takes me a while. I am the kind of person that just will listen to Diana Ross over and over and over again and never not listen to new stuff.
I'm still listening to Gaslight Anthem's album from 2008. Right. So
we've all got our sticky music, right? But there's a viral sound. It's been popular for a while. It's not like it's brand new, but the song Back on 74 on TikTok. Have you heard this at all? It's a viral sound that is very like dancey. It's very new disco. It kind of has some like mid 20th century like girl group or boy band is not really the phrase we use then, but like doo-wop and Motown inspired sounds infused in it. And I finally was like, okay, I really like the stupid sound that TikTok keeps exposing me over and over again. I'm going to listen to the whole album. And the album is called Volcano. And the group is called Jungle. The album released at the end of 2023. And it is my summer vibe for sure.
Hell yeah. The whole album?
Yeah, the whole album's pretty good. And it's like, again, kind of dancey, new disco, but it does have some like rap verses on it. Not throughout the whole thing, but there are a couple of tracks that do. And it's good driving around music, sitting on the porch music. I'll listen to it while sitting in a kiddie pool at some point in time in the near future, undoubtedly. But it's pretty rare that I find a new album where I'm like, by an artist I've never listened to, and I'm like, this is worthwhile. And now it is integrated into my repeated
social media single paid off in being a good fuller album.
Yeah,
I haven't learned that time before. Fuck you, AWOL Nation. Remember that song? Do you remember that song? Sail! I was like, wow, this must be cool. Let me. Fuck, God damn it. The rest of the album sucked.
Yeah, they TikTok has introduced me to like two groups. The Flyana, it's like a duo of women that rap together.
What are they called?
It's like Flyana. I'll have to look up. This is classic, one of those read it 1,000 times, never said it out loud.
Yeah. Flyana Boss?
Yes. They are really fun, and I do listen to them. And then Jungle is the next one. And I will say, in talking about this with some friends, multiple people have been like, yeah, they've been making good music for like 10 years. I'm like, well, great. It's the first time I have learned about it. And you all should be happy that I'm not listening to the same Paul Simon Graceland album for the 50th time in a single day. Yeah. So that's my contribution.
Hell yeah. Well, moving on to current events, what's going on in the world right now that's either got you celebrating or living in despair?
Yeah, I felt like we couldn't really go through this episode without talking about the student protest cycle that's been happening around Palestinian liberation and the genocide that the Israeli state is enacting on Palestinian people. And it is a situation, the circumstances, I think ride the rails of both, right? Like I am celebrating and also living in despair. More than 2,000 students were arrested in repressive crackdowns in these Palestinian liberation encampments across the country this past week, including 5 here at Florida State University locally last Wednesday, I believe. And I want to cheer on the student protesters for being really highly principled. Like a lot of the missives and messages that we're getting out and that are being percolated through mass media is like, they have designated speakers. Their messaging is on brand and tight. They are not like just random folks are saying random shit and conflating and causing confusion around what the messaging is.
And it's working because the typical like bad players who would reframe the protests are kind of twisting themselves in knots to try to,
because they're not giving them the juice.
Yeah, I just saw the article somebody wrote where they were trying to spin. Do you know what I'm talking about? They were trying to spin the fact that they were asked some student protesters like what they felt, and they said, I haven't been trained for media responses yet. And which is great. I mean, that's a great response. Go talk to this person who has, and they're tying themselves in knots to show like, well, it's a cult. They haven't been fully indoctrinated yet, which is like, no, it's people wising up to the tactics and realizing, no, we need to. I just like to see that, especially that it's getting like more on like neolib conservative proofed in how they respond and react, which is cool.
They're being incredibly principled in their organization. And I also think that part of this is that allows them to clearly connect their goals and demands, i.e. divestment, to the institutions in which they're located, right? Like they're not, it's not turning into a like Occupy Wall Street situation where there's all of these intersecting arguments and demands being made, and there is no singular demand being put to the forefront. It's clear, it's concise, it's deliberate. They are taking up the issue with the appropriate person in power, meaning like your college or university cannot stop what Israel is doing, and it's likely to, it's not very unlikely to stop the United States from, say, supporting arms trades or deals with Israel. But what you can do is leverage these massive endowments to put financial pressure. And I think, I really want to commend them for being so deliberate and building off of decades of mobilizing efforts around the BDS movement, like really finding a concrete manifestation of that right now, when there's an increased attention to the issue. Like, that's very smart. I find their actions and commitments to inspire hope, which is a thing that's in short supply recently. Another thing that I find hope in is the long-established social movement, like research finding that conflict and contestation between elites is a time that is ripe for change. Elite solidarity is not uniform, and where fissures exist lie the opportunity to insert a wedge. So when we see, I forget what city it was, but there was somewhere in California, it might have been Riverside, where the mayor was like, we're not, like, the city cops are not going to be used against these protesters as long as things like are remaining peaceful. And the fact that there's like disagreement between local actors, state level actors, national politicians, like anywhere where there's a gap, that is an opportunity to exploit it to achieve the end goals. And it's been done historically, and the youth are really smart and motivated and strategic and well organized. And so I feel like those things dovetail together well, and it makes me really hopeful for the outcome of these actions.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I add a rant to that too?
Sure.
Because I've encountered this. Oh God, now I might be backtracking because this might be hitting too close to home as far as family members on Facebook. But I would say that I personally don't give a fuck about whether or not these protests affect any sort of voter turnout. And I think if that's your main complaint about it as like a white liberal, then just shut the fuck up and take this somewhere else. I've gotten in an argument on Facebook because basically somebody put a post that like the property damage, the protests. They also called wearing keffiyehs Hamas-like gear, which I'll save that for a different argument. But it culminated in saying, how is this behavior supposed to gain my support for the election? And my response was, it's not fucking about you. Like, I don't know. I hate that shit. I don't know. Maybe this is because it was a very specific incident that I'm thinking of, just a very specific interaction. But I do feel like I have heard more too about like talking heads and just pundits talking about how it will affect the election in 2024, which again, I don't give a fuck about that, and I don't think anybody should. And if you do, then I don't think you're putting your care or emphasis in the right place.
Well, and if you cannot use your vote as leverage, then it is not a vote.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
that's my thing, right? Like, if we're going to pretend that it has any meaning, that it has, that it's connected at all to democratic responsiveness, meaning like my vote has an impact on the policies that take form, and that the policies that take form reflect back on what voters will, right? If any of that is real on any level, and we haven't totally dispensed with the myth that it is, then people should withhold their votes when they feel so motivated to, because that's one of the only ways of demonstrating that your vote means anything. Yeah. So it's basically just saying, I don't think that issue, it's libs who say that are saying, I don't think that issue is meaningful enough, right? Exactly. In my opinion, and we don't care about your opinion. How about that?
Yeah, maddening. Oh, and then I will get more specific about this one because I don't know who this person is that also replied in this Facebook argument I got into, but I referred to it as a genocide because it is a fucking genocide. And this person wrote, we're using the term genocide very loosely, aren't we? And they, I just thought this was funny. They wrote something about, I would refer to U.S. code blah, 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 that says that, basically says something about, civilian casualties are okay in times of war, caught up in warfare, which I just think is very funny to like tell a Palestinian whose like entire family has been murdered, like, actually, no, it's okay because we have a U.S. code that says that it's warfare. Fuck it.
Right.
Or too specific about arguments that I got in on social media this week, but it really pissed me off. Yeah. Anyways, now I'm just worried that I said too much, and this is going to be identifiable, and now Thanksgiving is going to be real weird when I edit it. But anyways, moving on. Unless you wanted to add to it.
No, I was just going to say, how about those rapping boys, huh?
Oh yeah, because that's what I want to talk about. Man, This has been great this week. Are you following the Kendrick Lamar v. Drake beef?
I am.
Are you as one-sided as I am on who we're rooting for?
So,
and there is a lot of nuance in this as well that I
I don't like Drake.
Can't say Drake. Long time Drake.
I supported Drake when he released one of the greatest, most fun rap songs of all time. Best I Ever Had.
Okay. I was trying to
I was a longtime Degrassi lover.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a teen. So there was a lot of built-in runway there for me to love him.
Yeah.
But I don't like that he is so clearly striving to be a pop star, but like denigrates that pathway and like continually like gets more famous and more rich off of women supporting him, and then continually like shuffles that to the side and wants to make assertions about him being this big tough guy.
Yeah, which I think is the majority of the jabs that Kendrick has launched at him is basically how he's used black women and black culture to like advance himself when it is easy
convenient.
to do so.
Convenient for him.
So for the uninitiated, if you're not following this, go ahead.
I will just say one of my favorite songs, one of those songs that just is like continually in my top repeated tracks, is a track that has both of them on it.
Ooh, can I guess?
Yes. And it's from basically right before this beef started.
Oh, well then my guesses are gone because I was going to say Poetic Justice or Fucking Problems.
It is Fucking Problems, which came out in the end of 2012. The very end of 2012.
Oh, you meant before the beef started, like
OG.
Historically,
yes.
OG. I thought you meant like started this round.
No.
Yeah, I like Fucking Problems too, but I don't like Drake's verse.
I mean,
it might just be residual Drake hatred, but
it is a fun. Again, you might see some common theme in how I relate to music. Drinking on the porch.
Yeah, hell yeah. And it's got our guy in it, 2 Chainz.
Yes.
2 Chainz said he liked Drake, but he lied. That's one of the bars in Kendrick's most recent song.
So take us through. Take us through what spawned this most recent conflict.
Yes. So as alluded to before, I think it kind of started in 2013 when Drake had the only real rap beef that I think Drake won was against Big Sean. And Kendrick appeared on a verse on a song called Control that was kind of about Drake, and he had like really veiled references to Drake that I don't think even were that big of a deal, but apparently Drake's been holding on to this grudge for a while. So last year he released a song called First Person Shooter with J. Cole, which was kind of like a all bravado song, but made reference to Kendrick and made reference to the idea of the big three, which is kind of what Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick have been called. And it kind of went, it didn't go unnoticed, but there was no response. Well, then a couple months ago, Metro Boomin and Future released an album.
It's a good album.
It is a good album, yeah. And they had a song on it, which I just blanked on the name. I'm trying to see where
Like That?
Like That, yeah. Where Kendrick is much more explicit in his hatred of Drake.
Big three.
yeah, fuck the big three. It's just Big Me. Yeah. And that then launched a series of Drake responses, which I didn't think any of them are good because most of Drake's like jabs are Kendrick is short and has small feet, which is like, okay, moving on. And Kendrick cheated on his wife, which is true, but he also made an entire album like kind of reckoning with that and the man that he's become.
Not news. Yeah.
It's not news, and it's also like Kendrick's all like that part in 8 Mile where he says all the shit that like bad about himself before they can say. He's like, yeah, Kendrick already did that to himself with like a whole album. So I don't know what is the news there. And then Kendrick has gone like scorched earth mode and has basically released a track about Drake like every day this week, culminating in one this morning or like late last night. Have you listened to that one yet?
Yes. Yeah, it was late last night. Yeah, I think the only thing that I will give Drake like inches on is that the production of some of Kendrick's tracks have been
a little
a little lackluster. Like some of them sound like he's recorded them on his iPhone, which I'm not saying that is a detriment to the argument. But he is clearly taking the approach of scattershot, right? Like Kendrick. I'm taking as many shots as I can as rapidly as possible, regardless of refinement, where Drake is like leveraging the whole machine behind him to put out songs that are like songs and not simply like recorded diss freestyles.
Yeah, because all of Kendrick's songs have been like 6 minutes long. But the last two have
just know he's got his notebook in front of him, like, fuck you, motherfucker.
But the last two especially, Meet the Grams is like maybe one of the best diss tracks. But yeah, I just want to like hit on a few of the points that Kendrick's making because I think they're great, and I also think that they've been muddied because a lot of people on the like Drake side have been saying that Kendrick is making fun of Drake for being biracial, which is not in my reading at all what he's saying. He's saying what we have alluded to already is that because he's biracial, Drake is using black culture, maybe not even because he's biracial, just he is using black culture to advance his own career when it's convenient. I was talking to a friend about this. Do you know a rapper named Shmino? Do you know who that is? I didn't know who that is either. But you know those like famous, not famous, but there's pictures of like Drake with the barrettes and the like curls in his hair.
Right.
Apparently that was like entirely lifted, like Shmino's persona, like that was his thing. Like a lot of the stuff he put on that like embarrassing album For the Dogs was like taken from this guy Shmino, and it's just like a microcosm of how Drake kind of steals from the culture, as it were, and then repossesses it as his own. And I think that's a lot of what Kendrick was talking about, specifically in the lines where like the refrain where he keeps saying, we don't want to hear you say the N-word no more.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting just to, like as a way to explore. And then also Drake's like misogyny and his uncomfortable history of having weird relationships with underage girls.
Certified pedophile, a song in A minor, whatever that lyric was is great. Like
A minor.
Ripped the skull off, you know, like damn.
And he has also not alluded to, straight up said that Drake has had another secret child that he's not discussed. And see, this is just messy as hell and I love it. But like clearly Kendrick has some connections within Drake's inner circle because a lot of the cover art has been like pictures of Drake's
his meds and like his ambient, like an ambient prescription. Yeah, I think that, as I kind of mentioned before, they're just not trying to do or be the same. They're not trying to have the same careers.
Right.
And I think that, as is often true with a lot of publicized rap beef, or really like culture beefs that are taking place in a cultural space, like a cultural artistic space, is like it's ultimately about authenticity, right? And like what does it mean to be authentic and have authentic claim over saying certain words, existing in a certain space. And I think what is different here is that Kendrick is just being so gloves off and like not stopping.
Yeah.
And we haven't had something contemporarily quite take that exact form in a while.
Yeah. And it just like, as a rap fan, it's making rap fun again for the first time in a while.
Well, it feels like there's stakes.
Yeah,
there are some stakes. I will say something that does piss me off a little as a, Meg fan, maybe verging on stan, is that like Drake did not engage her diss.
But
yeah, like,
I mean, that tracks though with him,
right? Yeah, for sure it does. But I'm just saying, it's like, Meg is saying not all of this stuff that Kendrick is saying, but Meg Thee Stallion released the track Hiss and said many things that are reflected in some of these tracks that Kendrick has released, and Drake had no problem firing shots about Meg being shot, right? Yeah. But then like when Meg returns it, he is doing this bullshit misogyny, like, well, you're a woman, I'm not going to engage you fully. Yeah, I'm not going to go there with, with a woman.
Especially she wiped the fucking floor with him.
Yes! So there's a little bit of me that's like, step your pussy up, Drake.
Yeah. Also the like more even sinister implications of some of Kendrick's songs, where he is explicitly saying that Drake is both engaged in some sort of pedophilia and or sex trafficking, and his record label is protecting others, which he mentions several times, that Drake's OVO label is specifically protecting people that others in the industry know to be predators. So there is like, beyond rap and beyond like being a fan, there is like some way more sinister fucked up shit that is seemingly somewhere under the surface of all this. So
well, and we've like known this, right? Like, I mean, it has been, I think there's some other more recent examples that Kendrick is referring to, but for years, like literally for 10 years, people online in gossip spaces, in rap, like writing, the journalist spaces have talked about Baka Not Nice being arrested for sex trafficking. And I believe, I would have to look this up, allegedly, because I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's my understanding that like Drake paid for his bail, and that at least that's what was, the rumors were at the time, allegedly, right? So these are not new allegations. What is new in some ways is it being wrapped up into these authenticity arguments.
Yeah. Which to me is the more interesting part too. But yeah, it's just been, it's been a fun week for rap music.
Yeah, it's been crazy, for sure.
Are we ready to dive into the movie we're here to talk about?
Yeah, before we do that, I just wanted to ask you, so we're going to be talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978 version, that was directed by Phillip Kaufman. Kaufman. Cold brew burp. What's up? And I was just wondering if you've seen any of his other work before we dig into the movie specifically.
I have not, unfortunately. There's like a few big ones that I've always wanted to see. The Right Stuff, and is it Jules and Verne or Henry and June with Somebody and Somebody?
Jules and Verne.
All one of them, Somebodies and Somebodies. But really
Henry and June, the first NC-17 rating, first film to get an NC-17 rating.
Is it really long?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. But really, unfortunately, the only one that I've seen of his, other than one we're going to talk about, is oh my god, I already forgot the name of it. Twisted. Is that what it was called?
Yes.
Twisted, which was like a kind of a erotic murder thriller with like Ashley Judd in the early 2000s that, from memory, was not very good. But again, it came out in 2004, and that is probably when I seen it. So don't remember much. But I have seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers quite a few times, and I like that. What about you? You've seen any of his oeuvre?
I have, but it's like a little bit all over the place. Like, I would not say it's like necessarily a great representative. Like the two films of his that I have seen that I have like the most recollection of, because I watched them in the last year specifically. I saw Quills, which came out in 2000. I am generally interested in media that engages with the myth, the legend, the lies, the truth of Marquis de Sade. And it is about when Marquis de Sade was imprisoned. Joaquin Phoenix is in it as a priest, like a horny little twisted priest. And God, what's her name? Kate Winslet is in it. Jeffrey Rush. Like, there's a lot of good performances and kind of funkiness happening in it. And then I also pretty recently, in the last year, watched The Wanderers, which is like a great companion piece to Grease. Like, it is about greasers. And I quite enjoyed it. I kind of viewed it as like it's kind of adjacent to Grease, and it's kind of adjacent to Jersey Boys. Like I would say like those kind of form a triangle of youth in the 50s. There are musical elements. They're horny and violent in very short bursts. There's violence kind of peeking around the edges of them. And even more so in The Wanderers, I would say, than those other two. But worthwhile. I do really, really want to watch The Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's one of the few D-Day Lewis movies that I have not seen. And then, as I mentioned, Henry and June being the first movie to receive an NC-17 once that rating was introduced. I'd like to check out. But he made a lot of like adult movies for adults.
Yeah. And a diverse, like,
a lot of different genres.
Yeah. Very interesting filmography. But yeah, so this is the second movie we're doing in our series called The Reds, White, and Blue, looking at film and the Red Scare and the fear of a communist menace. In our last episode on John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate, we discussed the machinations of the Red Scare. We discussed the Foreign Registration, Smith, and Voorhees Acts, which were designed to keep tabs on people and workers who associate with outside countries or groups with connections deemed undemocratic. We discussed how the U.S. government targeted labor unions with the Taft-Hartley Act, which allowed the government and the NLRB to ignore any labor disputes brought up by unions who had not filed an anti-communist affidavit. And we discussed the House Un-American Activities Committee and Joseph McCarthy, the attack dogs who launched a campaign of terror designed to root out the communists lurking in our schools, homes, churches, and films. Not wanting to appear soft on communism or launch an attack against McCarthy, a fellow Republican of some influence, President Dwight Eisenhower avoided the subject for years, allowing McCarthyism to flourish and creating an American mirage of subversives waiting for the right moment to undermine American democracy. And all of these events created a culture of paranoia and persecution that were allowed to flourish and mutate into large-scale crusades against regular Americans. One life upended by the paranoia was that of Irving Adler. Adler was a math teacher at the Stronben-Muller Textile High School in Manhattan. In 1951, 16 years after Adler joined the Communist Party as a 22-year-old, he found himself subpoenaed by the Senate Judiciary Committee and forced to testify about the negative influence of communism in American schools. Irving Adler invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify in front of the Senate. He was suspended from his teaching position and eventually fired, justified under the 1949 Feinberg Law. From an article in the Harvard Crimson in 1952 singing its praises, the Feinberg Law
directs the Board of Regents to deny subversives, those who advocate violent overthrow of the government, the privilege of teaching in New York City's public schools. It provides that after full hearings, the Board of Regents may declare an organization subversive and may refuse any member of that organization a teaching position. The basis for this law is that employment as a teacher places limits on freedom of thought and expression.
Irving Adler became the lead plaintiff in the case Adler v. the Board of Education, a lawsuit alleging that the law in Irving's firing, along with 350 other New York teachers, was unconstitutional. Though winning the case at the New York Supreme Court, the decision was ultimately overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision, ultimately upholding the determination that teachers do not have freedom of thought and expression. Part of the Supreme Court's majority opinion on the case read,
"The Feinberg Law makes elaborate findings that members of subversive groups, particularly of the Communist Party and its affiliated organizations, have been infiltrating into public employment in the public schools of the state. That this has occurred and continues notwithstanding the existence of protective statutes designed to prevent the appointment to or retention in employment in public office, and particularly in the public school."
During the mid-20th century, the institutions of governing in America made it clear. Americans aren't to be trusted. Your friends, colleagues, lovers, and families are threats against the very foundation of our democracy. The culture of paranoia was a dominant force in American life. Enter the novel Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney, a science fiction novel about aliens and pod people that became an overwhelming allegory for the paranoia of the Red Scare. Over the last 70 years, there have been 4 major adaptations of Jack Finney's novel, each made roughly 20 years apart. In this episode, we'll discuss Phillip Kaufman's 1978 adaptation, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But I think it makes sense for us to examine all 4 in context with each other, especially Kaufman's adaptation and how it differs from the original cinematic adaptation, 1956's The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, directed by Don Siegel. Don Siegel's original film came out in 1956, 2 years after Dwight Eisenhower finally began to distance himself from Joseph McCarthy after McCarthy's numerous witch hunts proved fruitless. Siegel's adaptation can be a muddy read, seen more as an allegory for the Red Scare itself. Communists are an alien species slowly pervading institutions of America.
Phillip Kaufman's 1978 adaptation, the one we'll be discussing today, is 2+ decades removed from the height of the Red Scare, and its allegory is more nuanced, taking aim more at the collapse in institutional trust, how paranoia flourished during the Me generation, and the white baby boomers who reaped the economic and political benefits of America's role as a global superpower while feeling increasingly alienated socially. In Kaufman's adaptation, the aliens are more inviting, begging Americans to join the crusade against their fellow man, to become a pod person, to be born again into an untroubled world free of anxiety, fear, hate, as Leonard Nimoy's character puts it. In Kaufman's adaptation, it's not the lurking communist who's the villain, but instead a homogenizing reactionary force responding to a threatened way of life promised by American exceptionalism. The fear in 1978's invasion of the Body Snatchers isn't that we might become a pod person. It's the fear that what was promised is not actually achievable, a fear of disorder, of not assimilating, not conforming, and the target it may put on your back. Conspiracies, suspicion, clandestine relations, and threat rule instead of connection, understanding, trust, order, and resolution. The Red Scare's legacy lurks within, but is subsumed under a wave of broader societal changes in a world where the Cold War isn't so cold, where patriotism is not redeeming, where politicians are known to lie, and collective mobilization has been all but choked out. All that's left is to concede.
Hell yeah. Well, we've set the table. Let's get into the movie. But first, how do you like this movie in general? Was this your first time seeing it?
It was.
Oh, it was?
It was my first time seeing it.
Did you like it?
Yes, I did. Quite a lot. I think that the opening sequence, which we're about to talk about, plays a really important role in making the movie much more special than it could be without it. Like, I think that there are some visual flourishes that take it from kind of standard sci-fi flick about the threat of people coming to get you to something that is a little more unique, a little more special, and has the ability to speak to some of these broader themes that we were just outlining.
Yeah. Hell yeah. Yeah, I like this movie too. This is probably the third or fourth time I've seen it, I think. Although my first time was fairly later in life. I probably saw it in my early 20s. But yeah, I love this movie.
Oh, me too.
Hey, I mean, I'm still in my early 20s. So.
Yeah.
But one thing that I always get struck by is how fucking gross this movie is. And I love it. Like, I know like David Cronenberg is widely considered as like the guy that kind of brought body horror to the common to like movies as a concept, but this movie is doing it big time in the late 70s, which I mean, Cronenberg started around then, but like the body horror elements in this are so fucking gross in the best possible way.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's like several points in my notes where I wrote like The Brood. Like this reminded me a lot of Cronenberg's The Brood, which came out in 79. So there's definitely some. I don't necessarily think it's like influence so much as like simultaneous, like this is the direction. There was maybe some innovation in practical effects and an openness to exploring the ways in which body horror could be metaphor for thematic considerations that were arising at the time. But
the effects in this are pretty fucking solid too.
Yeah.
Especially the one which I don't want to blow, but we'll get to it. But I still remember the first time I saw this movie when it happens. I was like, "What the fuck?" And I was like, "This is the best movie I've ever seen in my life." It's not anything major. It's a very honestly me moment. Something that like I feel like is just. Of course, I'm gonna love this part.
Yeah, same. I assume we're
the dog.
The dog. Yeah.
But yeah, I just like in all the things that we're gonna talk about. As far as like how it is an allegory for the Red Scare, I love it as a horror movie and as like a gross effect movie too. It's really, it's just grody. Like especially like the sequence where we get to see the pod spit out like the replica, like the little baby thing. It's so gross and slimy and I love it.
Yeah, it's definitely goopified. Yeah, for sure.
And that opening sequence is really cool, which is like, I guess just the seeds, the spores from an alien. Like, it's over the opening credits, and it's just the seeds or spores from an alien planet kind of detaching, floating off into space, and like finding themselves on Earth. That's gross too, and in a really like beautiful way. That's kind of like just subtly playing over the opening credits, but I like that.
Yeah, I think it has. There are elements of it that kind of feel like a reinscription or a reference to 2001, because we see like the planet, planet Earth really zoomed out. Like there's this kind of zoomed out reflection of human life as a whole, as opposed to like individualized experiences. That opening sequence again just kind of reminds me of what Kubrick was doing.
There's also what I thought was a oblique reference to 2001. Wait, does oblique mean vague? Did I use it the complete opposite way?
Yeah.
There's one word that I can't think of now that I get wrong, and I literally use
in the
it
direct
in the opposite
opposite
of how it's meant to. But there's one where one of the characters references like the aliens like just monkeys playing with bones that became human or something like that. Yeah, which I felt like there's like definitely feels like it was on his mind, Phillip Kaufman, when making it. But
well, and I think that to me, like part of why, aside from visually, why that sequence reminds me of 2001, because to me 2001 is so much about how, like, obviously the evolution of humanity and how humans will find reflections of ourselves wherever we look. And I think there's this element of like an inversion of that, where it's like this biological entity will like latch on to that reflection, right, to its own benefit. But yeah, the opening sequence is really beautiful. And then we immediately go into Elizabeth, who's one of our main characters. Craig will go over all those characters in a minute, but we actually don't even learn her name for quite a while into the movie. We just know that there's like a disembodied woman's voice who's reading about this flower pod that she has found in an encyclopedia. She talks about identifying it as a grex, like basically where two plants have been grafted onto each other and produce something new. And she talks about how the encyclopedia says that they tend to be found in places like war-torn Europe, and that they flourish on devastated ground. Okay. Which I think speaks to some of those themes that we were talking about at the beginning, where to me this movie is just, it can very much be about the Red Scare and the Cold War, but it can also be about generalized anomie, which I use as a Durkheimian phrase that means like rootlessness. Like there's a sense of normlessness. Things are in shift, in flux, and there is just disorder is happening, right? Yeah. And that's a part of how I interpret why this is integrated in from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I think we should mention that whereas Manchurian Candidate, like, communism is very visibly in the movie. With this one, it is never mentioned. It is not a plot point. This is strictly an allegory that we recognize because of the context of when the original was made and the follow up with this one and kind of the responses and things like that. But yeah, Hal mentioned the Elizabeth character, who is a scientist at the health department in San Francisco, who is a coworker, colleague, and kind of the unrequited love of the main protagonist, Matthew Bennell, played by Donald Sutherland, who is a health inspector in San Francisco. And Elizabeth does have a boyfriend who, I like that guy's arc, because he is an asshole and then becomes like a different kind of asshole when he gets pod peopled, which I thought was fun. But the other players are Jack Belichick, who I always forget every time I watch this that Jeff Goldblum is in this movie.
This is prime hot Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, yeah,
I have to say, he walked on screen. I was like, yo. Yeah.
Also, prime hot Jeff Goldblum. He plays a stiff, and I think we might have even talked about this before. But in Death Wish, he's one of the guys that breaks into Charles Bronson's house and kills his wife.
Whoa!
A real asshole in it.
No.
And then Nancy Belichick, played by Veronica Cartwright, is Jeff Goldblum's character's wife, and they run like a spa together.
I have to say, for the first 3 scenes that she was on, there is quite a while between when she is introduced and when he says my wife.
Yeah.
And I thought that they were brother and sister. Is like the tone that I was picking up from it.
Yeah, because they don't have that like. It's not a very loving relationship.
Yeah, there's like no affection between them until But but so there's definitely a place in my notes where I was like, wife ?
Yeah. And then the fifth major player is Dr. David Kribner.
Amazing.
Who is played by Leonard Nimoy, who's this kind of pop psychologist that is promoting a book that he's been working on, and is a friend of the Jeff Goldblum character, and is kind of like the foil, I guess, to some of the characters, as he's like continuously trying to rationalize some of the things that they're encountering. But I think as like a main cast, I think all 5 of them play really well off of each other, and there's like a lot of really great sequences in it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those films where it's like, and I do think we're in a little bit of a renaissance of this in terms of our current cultural moment, so I'm not saying this necessarily as a criticism, but of being able to reflect and go, this was a genre film that had like some heavyweights in it.
Yeah.
And the performances are really strong. Before we move into from talking about characters to talking about like what happens next in terms of the plot, I did want to take this moment to reflect on a pretty significant change from the previous iteration to this, which is that Matthew Bonnell's character, the Donald Sutherland role, is part of is a inspector with the Department of Health, as opposed to being a small town doctor, which is the form that it takes in the previous movie. And how this again just kind of really speaks to some of those themes that we touched on, of like the 1970s is the time where in the United States we see a really serious drop off in like institutional confidence ratings. So for example, like Pew Research Center found in 1978 that 29% of respondents say that they trusted the government to do what is right just about always / most of the time, where in contrast 1964, kind of the closest date to 1962 where they have data, when the previous movie that we covered, The Manchurian Candidate, was released, when that number was 77%, right? So like in a little over a 10-year period of time, we see a really precipitous decline in institutional trust. And I think having Donald Sutherland's role be based in the Department of Health is a way of capturing that those social ties and threads are frayed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and the original you already mentioned is a doctor played by Kevin McCarthy, not the moron who got ousted from the speaker position. But did you catch that he makes a cameo appearance? The original Matthew Bonnell, Kevin McCarthy, is in the movie as the cab driver near the end.
Is taking them to the airport.
Yeah, that's the guy who played the Donald Sutherland.
The OG.
Did you catch the other weird cameo at the beginning of the movie, which I don't know, maybe I did this every time I've watched it and then like, what the fuck? Because I had to rewind and then say, is Robert Duvall in this movie?
Yes.
Because Robert Duvall is in this fucking movie.
Yes, I did. I did.
Which I don't remember.
What?
Yeah, maybe. I'm sure I've said that every time I've watched this movie and then forgotten, but he's just a priest on a swing at the beginning of the movie. So a couple weird cameos. But yeah, let's get into some of the plot elements. So obviously we've alluded to the fact that this alien plant species has come from another planet and is invading Earth, and the way in which, I guess we don't have to reveal, because the characters don't really discover how it works until later, but essentially this flower that Elizabeth has found and is like studying will mutate into a pod that will eventually, when people are sleeping, get its little tendrils onto them and perfectly recreate a facsimile of their body, and then render their actual real body into dust, I guess. And the first time we see that, and this is where like I think a lot of the fear comes from. I like movies when the fear is just uncanny, like weirdness. Do you know what I mean? Like the just why the fuck is this happening? It's bizarre in ways that I can't put my finger on. I will refer to the blowjob dog scene in The Shining, which is always the scariest part in the whole movie to me, because it's just that uncanny, like, hold on, what am I looking at and why? And I think this movie has a lot of it, but especially the part that really freaks me out in ways that I can't quite describe is the interaction with Elizabeth's boyfriend after he is pod peopleified,
right?
Which, like, he's an asshole in the movie, like, kind of distant from her, and then
and now he's like an asshole in a new way that is hard to locate exactly why he's behaving. All the unexplained behavior of, like, oh, he's not at his office, and when he says that he will be, and he's walking and having conversations with people that she's never seen him with before, like, stuff that is in and of itself, like, not, it's not the same as, like, the dog, the human faced dog, right? Like, it's not explicitly horrifying, but because of the context that we have, we can't jive it with the context. Like, we cannot integrate it.
And there's something about, like, the way that, I don't know the actor's name, but the way that he moves and in those sequences is really unsettling. Like, there's a lot of, like, right angle turns and, like, upright stiffness. Like, because the first weird thing she sees him do is it a box? He picks up a box and takes it out to the trash man and throws, like, just dust into it.
I think it's supposed to be webs.
It's his body, right? What's left of his body.
Okay, I assumed it was webs because every other time we see the garbage container, they are taking away webs from the descent of the pods that have covered the city.
It's like the debris of the change or whatever. But just him carrying the box through the house, like hard right angle turns, there's just an uncanny, like, weirdness that creeps me out every time I watch this movie. And then that guy gets hit by a car. And all the people are just like, okay.
All right.
That guy got hit by a car. Well, moving on.
We'll keep it trucking.
Before the characters realize what's going on, and the audience does, there's just a lot of, like, uncanny bizarreness that I really like in that.
Yeah, that's definitely a mode of horror that I like a lot. It's why I like, I mean, I'm not saying, he's a piece of racist shit. I'm not saying, like, he is good in and of himself, but the elements that I really like of Lovecraft, a lot of them are, like, kind of in that, have that uncanny element where it's, like, approximating humanness, but just a few steps off of it. That's why I like Stuart Gordon adaptations of Lovecraft stuff a lot. And it's also why there's a lot of J horror and K horror that freaks me the fuck out when, like, when body horror and the uncanny are combined together. It definitely is tickling my lizard brain in a way that I don't care for.
Like a
or I do care for, but
dog mask.
Yes.
The Shining. Now I feel like I'm repeating myself, but The Shining is the first movie that I remember turning off at night and finishing in the morning because I got too scared.
Oh wow!
Because I saw it as a teenager, and it's specifically the scene where the woman gets out of the tub and he's like, "All right, baby," and then he starts kissing her, and he looks in the mirror, and she's like rotting, and, like decrepit, waterlogged and stuff. And I was like, "Nope, turn that off." I was like 12, and I was like, "Nope, gonna finish that one in the morning."
That requires full daylight.
But yeah, so the movie progresses, and we see, like, people acting strangely. Mostly we see that through the eyes of Elizabeth's boyfriend, who's, like, she follows and sees having these strange interactions and, like, passing off these pods to different people that seemingly all don't know each other but are all on the same, like, agenda of whatever the hell they're doing. And then we kind of get the body horror really starts when they go back to the spa that's owned by Jack and Nancy, and they discover what they think is a body, but it's unformed and, like, unfinished and has, like, webby tendrils all over it, and they notice it doesn't have any fingerprints. Real gross. How do we like that?
I like that it is paired with some other moments of misdirected horror, like them digging in the mud of the bath, and, like, it's actually fine. It's just the guy needs help getting out of it, Like, I like that it's paired with that because the tension is building. And you're like, something gross is about to happen, and then it is not actually the object that we initially think is going to be the source of it. Instead, it's one of these other curtained rooms.
Yeah. And
I will say, I don't know that the sculpting on that figure, it took me a while to realize that it was supposed to be Jeff Goldblum.
But doesn't it because they come back to it, right? They leave and come back.
Yes, but it's missing when they come back, because
okay.
the other ones,
formless,
right? And it over time, like as it builds towards taking over, it looks more like it. But it did not, because we haven't seen that introduced before up until that point in the movie. We don't know how the pod people take over. I did not assume that it was Jeff Goldblum. And so it took a little bit of time for that to unravel.
Yeah.
For me, as someone who had not seen the movie before.
Well, when they discover the Jeff Goldblum one, they also discover back at Elizabeth's place that there is another, what they think is a body, and recognize it as hers, even though she's still very much alive. And that's when they start to put the pieces together that the pods are somehow recreating these people and kind of taking over their consciousness, or actually just exterminating their consciousness and replacing it with a warm body, basically, because they're all like a hive mind. Yeah,
I think that this is a place where I can see where it feels to me like there's a little bit more embedded reference to like the threat of communists, because something that is not really part of current communist scare tactics by capitalists, but very much was in the 20th century, was the idea of communists were atheists, they were beholden to science, and they were cold. And I think that some of those very specific dimensions of the archetype and stereotype do not like hold true anymore. Sure. And so some of that I think is like a little lost to time, but I do think that that's part of how, like, what's going on here and how the people are crafted, right? Is intentionally supposed to be like the like scientific drive has taken hold and you don't have any individuating characteristics anymore, and you're absorbed into the Borg, like is how capitalists conceived of communists in the 20th century, even though that's not so much part of the stereotype now. And
we also start to see how the like pod people or whatever begin taking over the like governmental institutions, as they are calling like 911 and various response agencies, only to discover that they've been compromised by the pod
taken
people.
over.
Yeah. That's a great scene when he's like, "How do you know my name? How do you know my name?" when he's on the phone with 911, and Jeff Goldblum goes, hang up the phone." And there's a lot of gravitas in that moment that gave me a little shiver. It wasn't necessarily scary. It was just that moment, like, I don't know, I like a moment when the characters realize they're in over their heads even more to a degree than they thought they were to begin with. And that's like that moment where they're like, oh fuck, we are cooked now.
Right. Like, we already knew we were in, the circumstances were poor, and we are essentially locked into this place, and now we truly know that there is no one to seek assistance from. It's just us here.
And I think it's also cool the way the movie like does not hold your hand at all. Like, there's not a lot of explaining, like explicit explaining, and I like how the movie has really subtle ways of showing that more and more of the people are compromised. Like, you just, it starts off small with like them following the boyfriend around and seeing like his weird interactions, and then the guy gets hit by the car and no one cares, and then they keep going out and realizing more and more people are weird, and then it gets to the point where it feels like it's almost just the four of them left, and that's when shit real starts to break wild. And it has one of the best devices of the movie, which is the like mouth open, point, and scream, which when the pod people are like trying to wrangle the last remaining humans, that's their way of signaling each other. And it's not a scream. I can't quite put my finger on what it is. It's like a high frequency whine or something.
And it sounds a little different for different people too. Yeah. So it's like kind of, some of them are kind of shrieking esque, but then others, it sounds a little bit more mechanical like a whirling sound. Which
we'll get to it, but there is a twist ending. Was the twist ending ruined for you just by being aware of the movie?
No, and in fact, like, the interesting thing about it, which I for certain have seen that image hundreds of times, right, is that I kept waiting for it to happen, but then because it didn't happen, I guess the thing is that the image alone does not convey that he's making a sound other than screaming. And so it absolutely could otherwise fit into the movie of him being shocked and and uttering in response to seeing something horrible. So when it happened, I was like, ah.
Okay, I just remember the
it
first
did not
time
ruin it
seeing
for me.
The only thing I knew about the movie was
that image.
I guess we can talk about it now. But the only thing I knew about it was that image of Donald Sutherland with his mouth open pointing, which once you've watched the movie, you realize that is the like form of communication of the pod people. So the twist at the end is that we think he's like the last remaining real human kind of making his way through society, only to reveal that. Well,
and very specifically, we have watched all of the other people that he's with get lost, get converted, whatever. And then he runs into Nancy. And so you think,
who isn't converted? She is like,
well, but we don't know, right?
She's
so the point is,
as if she's not.
It looks as if there is a moment of like, oh, they may have found each other. Like there actually is connection possible outside of the hive mind. And she approaches him to speak as if in fact she is not a pod person, and that is when it is revealed that it is he who has been absorbed.
I think, which is another great allegory for the Red Scare and the way that friends turn on each other and like caught up in the panic of it all. I think is a great moment. But so we see them. They eventually are cornered by Dr. Kibner, who is at. Okay, so my question is, when do you think he got turned?
I think he's been turned the whole time. This is why I think that there are parts of it that are more subtly a reference to communists, is because I think him, even again, it's kind of funky because like our current interpretation of that kind of pop psychology of like therapizing yourself, like I would not say we associate with the left necessarily, though maybe, I don't know, some people on the right might associate like the having feelings and being connected to them as being like social justice warrior, but we don't think of it as being communistic, right? Like as being attached to the communists. But there are a lot of threads of the development of psychology that are connected to Eastern Europe and the USSR, like William Reich, for example, would be an example of a psychoanalyst that was deeply attached to communism and the development of communism in Eastern Europe. So I do think that that's intended to be like communicate something, right? Like taking this hyper analytic and regimented approach to social relationships that Leonard Nimoy's character does, I think isn't intended to communicate like he's part of this along. Yeah,
because his role at the beginning is kind of the skeptic, I guess, that's trying to rationalize everything, and then we see that he is a pod person once he corners our remaining four and gives a great monologue, which we referenced in the thing, where he says, I want to say it again because I loved it. He says, basically, join us as a pod person and be born again into an untroubled world free of anxiety, fear, hate. Goddamn, Leonard Nimoy is great at like, obviously working within genre, but also giving it like a lot of gravitas and I mean, he's supposed to be a mindless alien species, but still manages to really like give it some oomph when he has to deliver a monologue, which I like.
Well, and we also have to believe earlier in the film that he is an expert who may be able to solve this problem using rationality, right? And he does a really good job of doing that while also not being cold in the way that like Spock is, right? Like he's doing something that is adjacent to Spock, but he's not simply just playing Spock.
And this is the point where they start to uncover the like wider conspiracy. And first they learn like how exactly the pods work, which is in their sleep is when they kind of build and recreate their person. And I don't know what the other, deflate their real person. Right. And then we see them uncover this warehouse they've been accumulating these pods and they're sending them out to different places. And that's when it like really becomes apparent that there are hardly any real people left, and we get that like insane we get the man dog scene, which is
man dog,
which is we see that the process can be interrupted because it happens because there's a man and his dog that we see several times throughout the movie, and they're sleeping on the ground together next to a pod, and I think Donald Sutherland like kicks it and it starts oozing. And then they go away for a while, and then when we come back we see that the man head is on the dog that was like, I guess the pod got fucked up, and there's just, and it looks cool, like it looks gross and cool for like 70s special effects. It looks so fucking creepy and scary.
Have you seen Brazil?
I've not seen Brazil.
I can't. Okay. Brazil is one of my favorite movies of all time, and there are scenes towards the end where there are like these baby faces on.
I've definitely seen that. Just
and it is reminds me of this a lot. Yeah. Like it's pretty similar.
It reminded me weirdly, and maybe that's just because I've seen it recently and I loved it, but some of the sequences in Beau is Afraid where you're just wandering in a world that you know is hostile and still encountering horrors beyond your imagination, which was really cool. So then we see Jeff Goldblum kind of sacrifices himself in a way to allow them to escape and kind of goes away. Does he show back up after that? Do we ever see him again? Or we're just, he basically is going to cause a distraction to let the others escape, thus sacrificing himself to become a pod person. And then we get a sequence of like Elizabeth and Matthew giving themselves like speed and shit to try to stay awake. But Elizabeth eventually,
which is really made me laugh on the level of just like, yep, speed being just like openly available, you know, like they're like taking it out of like a medicine bottle. Like it is
a better time. But one of the most enduring images of the movie, I think, and like one of my favorites, is him realizing that Elizabeth has been compromised by the pod, or is currently being compromised, and her person is almost being fully like completed as a pod person, and they embrace, and she fucking deflates and crumbles in his arms. Oh, it's so gross and weird. Bleak too. Bleak ending of a movie.
This is like a thing that I kind of love in a horror movie, is like it actually, you're not able to escape, where there is no resolution, or the resolution is capitulation. I'm not saying that that's like great politically or something, but I do find it to be like a really compelling narrative mode to say, like, you're not going to escape this.
Even the like protagonist is not safe from himself, basically. But circling back to the ending, the twist, I didn't already say this, but I do specifically remember the first time I saw it, knowing the twist ending coming, specifically because the only image I ever saw of it was Donald Sutherland doing the point and scream. So I remember the first time being like, when's he do it? He's gonna trick somebody by doing it, by pretending, and then realizing, he's not gonna, it's gonna be him. So anyways, not the most what the fuck am I even talking about? I completely lost that thread. I just remember being like, the first time I saw it, just being like, fuck, I knew the twist,
waiting for it.
But yeah,
you should try being dumb as hell like me, because I was just like, I don't know when this is gonna happen, and I don't know what it means.
I'm already there. I am dumb as hell. I do want to talk about the other adaptations of it, one of which I've seen and one of which I haven't. But I do think, even not having seen one of them, I think it is clear to see how the like paranoia and theme is like kind of evergreen for whatever the moment is in American politics, because the third adaptation is by Abel Ferrara in 1993, which takes place at a military base in Alabama and is more of a response to like Reaganism and kind of the impending eventual disaster in the Gulf. The Gulf War would have just happened, but didn't really pop off until a decade later. And then I saw this when it came out, and I don't remember really liking it that much, but Oliver Hirschbiegel did The Invasion in 2007, which, as I remember, was kind of more of a response to like the Patriot Act and post 9/11 mentality and things like that. Which, have you seen either of those?
I have not, but I should, because I've been watching some Abel Ferrara movies for the first time relatively recently, and I see the Invasion is Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
Also, apparently,
in it, yeah.
Veronica Cartwright is in it
and
in
Nicole
a
Kidman
bit role.
leans 5'8". Have you? Okay, tangent. I'm sorry, but I wanted to say it because I recently watched Tig Notaro's new special. Are you a Tig fan?
I am. I think she kind of requires a specific mood for me to be interested.
Can I ruin one of her jokes?
Sure.
She talks about how she embarrassed herself in front of Reese Witherspoon one time because they were talking about people they know and their heights, and Tig did not know that Shailene Woodley was a person, and Reese Witherspoon said, Nicole Kidman's 5'10", but Shailene's 5'8", or Nicole Kidman's 6'10", but Shailene's 5'8", and Tig responded to, "Oh, cool, I dated a woman with a hunch once, so she was shorter." And everyone looked at her like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then later she realized that she did not say Nicole Kidman is 6 feet. She leans 5'8". She said she's 6 feet and Shailene is 5'8". But now anytime anybody said Nicole Kidman, I can only think, she leans 5'8".
Well, obviously Tig hasn't watched Big Little Lies.
No, that is what they're talking about.
I know that's what they're talking about because Reese Witherspoon produced it.
No, Tig is famously doesn't know anything about pop culture. Have you ever watched her web show? What was it called? It was basically like a parody of a talk show, but the whole premise was that Tig does not pay attention to pop culture and doesn't know even like some of the most famous celebrities are. So she would interview famous celebrities, and the whole bit was she was trying to guess who they were by the end of the interview.
No, really I have not. I once saw her perform at Ruby Diamond.
Yeah? Oh, I love
many moons ago. It was like right when her the stool bit.
Oh, one of the best.
It was like right when that was. I don't know if she just introduced it or if it was just part of her, part of her. Yes.
Oh, she did. Oh,
yes.
That's interesting. I never knew that she did it as part of her act. I only ever saw it on Conan and thought that she did it just for Conan.
No, she did it as part of her act. It was a very interesting show because the opener was James Adomian, who I love.
Oh, yeah, he's cool.
But his style of it was basically just like they were like queer people. Like this is like queer comedy, but their brands of comedy are very, very different.
More like
he's goofy and
goofy and loud, and she's dry and
yes. It was like a real he's doing a lot of accent work and talking. He has this very funny bit on queer coding villains, and then it's like cut to 15 minutes later, and Tig is like dragging a stool
doing an impression of a baby in a shower. I will say that Tig Notaro's Live is like one of the coolest, best stand-up specials of all time that was never even intended to be a special. Do you know that? Have you heard that one? It's the one that she did like a day after being diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I am. I just didn't realize
extemporaneous her making jokes about I've got cancer. Like, it's so good, and God, I love it. I'm sorry, I distracted from the topic at hand. But yeah, so that's the movie. Did you want to talk about some of the other interpretations and themes that we can kind of glean from it?
Yeah, so the first, some other stuff I wanted to talk about this. The first relates to beloved friend and listener Jared sent me some photos of a chapter of a book called Contagious. The book is called Contagious Cultures, Carriers, and the Outbreak Narrative by Priscilla Wald, where she does a little bit of, the author does a little bit of reinterpretation, like retroactive reinterpretation of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in light of the AIDS epidemic and crisis. So I think that is, you know, potentially like a meaningful frame for reflecting on the way like our culture deals with the idea of contagion, and how we treat people that we label as being the source of contagion. Right. I also, while watching it, thought a lot, and some of this is because of the San Francisco connection for sure. But I kept reflecting on or thinking about the way like tech capitalists and like rich tech bros talk about homelessness, drug addiction, and public displays of mental illness in San Francisco currently. But how they kind of imagine themselves as the victors exempt from this contagion. Like they're witnessing other people become pod people, and that somehow they're free from, you know, these dynamics. And I mean,
or somehow unresponsible for the dynamics too.
Right, like they're victims of the dynamics, but they're not people who could ever be touched by it directly, and they definitely didn't cause it in any way. And the thing that made me start thinking about this is that there's a line early on where I think it's Jeff Goldblum's character says it was like the whole city had changed overnight. And I just think about these rich ass motherfuckers on Twitter being like, you know, I've lived in San Francisco for 20 years and it was never like this ever before, and it's a totally new phenomenon that's caused by leftists and permissive drug laws, and we definitely need cops to solve this problem.
Absolutely dumb reactionaries that can't put any modern ills into context from all the shit that came before it, and just complain about essentially they're complaining about the aesthetics of the city.
Right. Well, and I think that it's not just that they can't, it's that like they won't, and that the ways in which their political perspective and their economic interests are tied together require that they only adopt this position. Then the other kind of interpretation or element, which is not really, I mean, of course, like can potentially have a political balance, but is thinking about this as like a classic sci-fi story about embodied consciousness, like thinking about when does individual consciousness begin and end, right? Like I kind of think about it like the ship of Theseus problem, like if you replace every part of a ship, is that ship the same ship? And thinking about that as a human, right? Like if the consciousness has been totally transformed, like are they still themselves? Which is maybe a little less sexy and exciting than like the more politically inclined interpretations, but just some stuff I was thinking about. While watching.
Well, this was a fun episode. I'm enjoying these Red Scare eps, and for our final one, we are going to watch Armando Iannucci's The Death of Stalin, much more contemporary than the previous, as this one is almost 50 years after Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because this came out in the last couple of years, but I've not seen it. Have you seen it?
Yes, actually Mike and I watched it like in the last couple of months for the first time.
Awesome.
So I look forward to watching it again and reflecting on it. I will say, you know, maybe as a little bit of a sneak peek, but one of the things I would like to reflect on in that episode is like the way, like a Western inability to like the ways in which Stalin is deeply tied to how we perceive the mission of communism and like the costs and benefits of that. Basically, like I think for me, one of the things about The Death of Stalin is that it's very much him being like, you know, defanging Stalin, and that there are pleasures and graces and benefits to that, but also how do we like undercut communism and its mission as a whole by like constantly focusing on these cults of personality, kind of a thing.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, stuff to dig into.
Yeah. But anything else for the Invasion of the Body Snatchers? We're trying to do the noise. I made myself cough.
I was pointing. You can't see it, but I was pointing.
Oh, shit. That one hurt, honestly.
Yeah.
It was a good thing we're at the end because I think I hurt myself.
Don't get got.
I'm not a pod person, clearly. But yeah, we'll get y'all on the next one.
See you on the flip side. Bye-bye.
Kill the poor.